Saturday mornings in our neighborhood usually moved at the speed of coffee. The air hung heavy and warm, carrying the faint hum of cicadas even before the sun had fully claimed the sky. Out here on the edge of Austin, things were quieter, slower. Folks liked to say you could hear the grass grow if you listened hard enough. I stepped out onto the porch with my mug, the ceramic already warm from my hands, and felt the heat on my face. It wasn't even 9 a.m., and the sun had already burned away the last traces of morning cool. The driveway gravel crunched under my boots as I headed toward the mailbox. That's when I saw it. The black pickup was parked just outside the gate. Not pulled over like a stranger checking directions. Parked with purpose. The engine idled in a steady rumble, a faint shimmer of exhaust curling from the tailpipe in the heat. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low, head tilted just enough that I couldn't catch his eyes. He was young, mid-20s maybe, broad-shouldered. I'd never seen him before. And then there was Lauren. She stood on the other side of the truck's window, close enough that their arms nearly touched. In her hands was a small, rectangular package, wrapped in brown paper. She leaned forward to pass it to him, and as he took it, her fingers brushed against his hand. Just for a moment. Too quick to call it anything if you weren't looking for it. Too deliberate to miss if you were. Something about the scene didn't belong. We didn't get many visitors this far out, and when we did, they came to the door. They didn't sit in running trucks waiting at the gate like they were avoiding being seen. Lauren glanced toward the house, and for half a second, I wondered if she saw me. But she didn't wave, didn't call out. Instead, she stepped back, gave the guy a small nod, and the truck eased away in a slow roll, turning toward the main road until the sound of its tires faded under the hum of the morning. By the time I reached the gate, there was nothing left, just a faint trail of dust in the air, catching the sunlight like drifting smoke. I stood there a moment longer than necessary, looking down the empty road. My coffee had gone lukewarm in my hand. When I stepped back inside, the air conditioning hit me like a wall. Lauren was in the kitchen, bent over a paper grocery bag, stacking apples in the fruit bowl like she'd been there all along. A couple of reusable bags sat on the counter, half filled with vegetables, bread, and a carton of eggs. "You were outside?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah, got the mail." "Oh, good." She straightened, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and added casually, "That was just a neighbor's kid. Needed a package delivered." I said I'd help out since I was heading into town anyway. The explanation came so smoothly it almost sounded canned. Like she'd known the question was coming. I nodded, trying to make my voice match hers. "That's so?" she said, tucking the eggs into the fridge. "His mom's not feeling great, so I figured, why not? It's on the way." It was plausible. We had neighbors scattered along the winding road into town. Still, I couldn't recall ever seeing a young guy in a black pickup among them. Most of the folks around here were older, long settled, their kids grown and moved off. I stood in the doorway, watching her line up the apples like soldiers, each movement precise. The whole thing, the truck, the hand touch, the fast switch into grocery duty, looped in my head like a clip I couldn't stop replaying. It was nothing concrete, just a flicker in the ordinary. But the way she'd answered so quickly, without missing a beat, left me with a thought I couldn't shake. She'd already decided what story she was going to tell me before I even walked in. I carried the mail to the dining table and shuffled through it: electric bill, junk flyer, a letter from my cousin in Dallas. All the while, my ears caught every sound in the kitchen. The rustle of plastic bags, the refrigerator door closing, the clink of glass jars being set on the counter. We didn't speak much after that. She moved on to rearranging the pantry, humming under her breath. I retreated to the living room, sat down with my coffee, and tried to focus on the news. But the words scrolled past without meaning. Instead, my mind kept drifting back outside, to the black pickup, the driver's lowered cap, the way Lauren's hand lingered just a breath too long. It was probably nothing. That's what I told myself. People read too much into little things, start building stories in their heads. But even as I thought it, I knew that wasn't quite true. My gut wasn't prone to false alarms. Still, I didn't ask again. Didn't press. If there was more to know, it would show itself in time. It always did. And as the day went on, the heat outside climbing toward triple digits, the image of that morning stayed with me. Not sharp, not screaming, but settled in the back of my mind like a pebble in a shoe. Small enough to ignore for now, but impossible to forget. For the rest of that Saturday, the image of the black pickup stayed with me. Not like a sudden blow, but like the faint hum of a refrigerator you only notice when the house is quiet. It was there in the background, threading its way through every other thought. I told myself not to read into it. There was yard work to finish, a leaky faucet to fix, and the early summer heat already turning the living room into a slow-baking oven. Lauren moved around the house as if nothing had happened, unpacking groceries, asking me if I wanted her to make sweet tea. She had the same easy tone she always used, and I did my best to match it. But over the next few days, I started seeing little things I'd missed before. First was her wardrobe. Lauren had always been practical: jeans, t-shirts, the occasional sundress for dinner out. Now she was pulling out outfits I'd never seen before, all at once. New blouses with patterns she'd never worn, snug jeans with perfect creases, shoes still stiff from the store. Along with the clothes came a new perfume. It wasn't overpowering, but it lingered, sharp and clean with a hint of something floral. It definitely didn't come from the little shop downtown where she usually bought her scent. I asked once, offhand, and she said she'd splurged at a boutique in Austin. The way she said it was casual, too casual. Then there were her evenings. Lauren had never been one to leave the house after dinner, preferring a glass of wine and whatever we were streaming. But now she'd started going to a co-working space 2 or 3 nights a week. Her marketing job didn't require that kind of setup. Her clients rarely even called after 5, but she claimed it helped her focus. She'd leave around 7, sometimes later, and not come home until nearly midnight. Her phone, once left on the kitchen counter while she cooked or watched TV, was now glued to her side, locked. At some point, she'd changed the passcode without mentioning it. One night, she came home with damp hair, smelling faintly of a shampoo I didn't recognize. "Got caught in the rain," she said with a small shrug. It was a neat explanation, except that I'd been outside most of the evening, and the sky hadn't so much as clouded over. A few days later came the late-night runs. Lauren had never liked running. She used to joke that she'd only run if someone was chasing her. But now she was lacing up sneakers at 9 p.m., saying she needed fresh air or wanted to try something new. She'd be gone an hour, sometimes more, returning flushed but not sweaty, cheeks pink in a way that looked different. None of these things on their own were enough to prove anything. But once you start seeing the pattern, it's hard to unsee. It was like staring at one of those hidden image posters. You don't notice the picture at first, but once it clicks into place, you can't go back to not seeing it. I started asking small, seemingly harmless questions. "Where's the co-working space? Maybe I'll drop by with dinner sometime." She said it was members only and had a no-guest policy after dark. I suggested joining her for a run. She said she liked running alone, that it helped her think. Her refusals were smooth, almost gentle, but they stacked up in my head like evidence on a shelf. By midweek, I realized I'd started tracking things without meaning to. Her car's mileage, the timestamps on her Instagram posts, the way her tone changed when she picked up certain calls. It was exhausting, this quiet, constant observation. One night, I woke to the faint sound of her voice downstairs. It wasn't her usual phone call voice. This was lower, softer, punctuated by pauses and a muffled laugh. I padded halfway down the stairs, but the sound stopped before I could make out the words. When I stepped into the kitchen, she was leaning against the counter with a glass of water, smiling faintly like she'd just heard something worth keeping to herself. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. She nodded. "Just watching some videos a friend sent." She even held up her phone, screen dark. That was when I realized it wasn't just the changes in her habits. It was the polish. Every answer was ready, like a card she'd already decided to play. The silence between us had changed, too. It wasn't the ordinary quiet of two people reading in the same room. It had weight to it, like the air just before a summer storm. We still ate at the same table, still slept in the same bed, but there was something invisible wedged between us. I kept telling myself there could be another explanation, that maybe I was pulling at threads that didn't connect. But the part of me that had learned to trust my instincts whispered the same thing every time she left the house at night. Every time her phone lit up with a name she turned away from me. Pay attention. By the time Friday rolled around, I was worn thin from the guessing. I'd spent nearly a week tracing the edges of my suspicions, convincing myself I was just being cautious, not paranoid. But suspicion has a way of growing teeth when you feed it. That evening, Lauren said she was going out to the co-working space again. She said it offhand while sliding a pair of earrings into place, her voice almost casual enough to make me believe her. Almost. I watched her leave from the front window, the sound of her car fading into the dark. I told myself I wasn't going to follow. But the second her taillights disappeared around the curve of the road, I was already grabbing my phone. Instead of chasing her down, I went to my laptop. I'd never been the type to snoop, but the rules felt different now. On a hunch, I pulled up Facebook, the kind of idle scrolling I told myself was just to pass the time. And there it was. A photo, fresh that afternoon, posted by someone I didn't recognize but tagged with her name. Lauren stood outside a food truck in broad daylight, grinning in a way I hadn't seen in months. Her arm was looped around a man's neck, his hand on her waist. Their faces tilted toward each other in a kiss that didn't need explaining. I stared at the image, waiting for my brain to suggest an alternative. Something about old friends, a joke taken out of context. But there was nothing to twist here. It was what it was. The man was familiar. The baseball cap, the build, he was the one from the black pickup. A friend of a friend filled in the rest. His name was Jake, 28. Worked in construction. No wife, no kids. According to them, Lauren had been thinking about leaving for him, thinking hard enough to risk 14 years of marriage. The irony was almost funny. Within weeks, maybe less, Jake had kicked her out, calling her too demanding. The same guy she'd been ready to trade a life for couldn't stand her long enough to finish whatever fantasy they'd started. I expected the hurt to come flooding in, but it didn't. Not in the way I'd imagined. No heat behind my eyes, no twisting gut. Just clarity, like a window had been wiped clean. I scrolled through the rest of the photos, each one another nail in the coffin of the story I'd been telling myself about us. Lauren laughing at a bar with Jake. Lauren leaning against his truck at sunset. Lauren holding a cup of coffee, looking at him with the kind of easy affection she hadn't shown me in months. The more I looked, the more the pieces lined up. The new clothes, the perfume, the late-night runs, the damp hair with no rain. Every half-answer she'd given me suddenly fit into place. It was a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve, but now the picture was complete. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow breath. This was the part where most people imagined confrontation, the shouting, the accusations, the demand for answers. But in that moment, I knew I didn't need any of that. She'd already told me the truth, just not in words. Instead of rage, I felt something else entirely. Control. The one thing she didn't know was that I wasn't going to play my role in the usual script. I shut the laptop and sat in the quiet. The house sounded different now, emptier somehow, even with me still in it. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the old floorboards when I shifted my weight. It struck me that this was the last time I'd think of Lauren and not see Jake in the same frame. Whatever we'd been before, we weren't that anymore. And there was no going back. Part of me wondered if she'd even try to hide it now. Maybe she'd spin another explanation, wrap it up in the kind of half-truth that kept her conscience tidy. Or maybe she'd double down, insist it wasn't what it looked like, that I'd misunderstood. But it didn't matter. The picture in my head wasn't going away. I made coffee even though it was late. I needed the focus more than the sleep. The next steps were going to matter. I didn't plan to tell her that I knew. Not yet. The longer she thought she was in control of the story, the more room I'd have to move without her getting in the way. When she came home that night, I was in the living room, a book in my lap I hadn't read a single page of. She breezed in with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, dropped her bag by the door, and kissed my cheek. Sorry I'm late, she said, toeing off her shoes. Got a lot done tonight. I nodded, making my voice even. Good to hear. She started telling me about some project deadline at the co-working space, her words smooth and practiced. I nodded in the right places, but inside, I was filing them away. Every detail she gave me now was a card she thought she could play later. When she finally went upstairs to shower, I stayed where I was, staring at the dark TV screen. I could see my reflection faintly in the glass, eyes steady, jaw set. It wasn't grief. Not anymore. It was resolve. When the truth settles in, it doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it lands like a stone at the bottom of a well, quiet, final, leaving only ripples that fade into stillness. That's how it was for me in the days after I saw the photos. I didn't confront her, not because I was afraid, but because anger was too easy. Anger lets the other person set the tempo. I wanted something colder. Sunday morning, I woke earlier than usual. Lauren was still upstairs, the faint sound of the shower running. I sat at the dining table with my coffee, flipping through the bank statements on my laptop. We'd always had joint accounts. It had made sense once, when there was still trust. Now it was just a liability. One by one, I transferred the balances into my personal account. Not a cent was left where she could reach it. The quiet tap of the keyboard felt almost surgical. Next came the lease. The house wasn't ours. We'd been renting for years from a landlord who lived 2 streets over. I knew the lease was in both our names, but I also knew he was flexible when it came to paperwork, especially for tenants who paid on time. By noon, I'd met him at his place, explained I was streamlining the agreement, and walked out with a new lease bearing only my name. The car was simpler. It had been mine before the marriage, still registered solely to me. I kept a spare key in the garage, a habit from long before Lauren. That evening, while she was in the kitchen, I went outside and swapped the keys from her ring with a decoy set that wouldn't start the engine. She wouldn't notice until she tried to drive. None of this was done in a rush. Every step was deliberate, quiet, invisible. By the time Lauren realized the ground beneath her was shifting, I'd already moved most of the pieces. She noticed the bank account first. It was Monday night when she came into the living room, holding her phone like it was evidence in a trial. "Did you move the money?" she asked. Her tone wasn't angry yet, more incredulous, like she thought there was some innocent explanation. "I moved my money," I said, not looking up from the book I wasn't reading. Her brows knit together. "Our money." "No," I said, setting the book aside. "My money. Yours is wherever you left it." The conversation didn't go much further that night. She huffed, muttered something about not understanding what's gotten into me, and left the room. But I could feel the temperature shifting. By Wednesday, she found out about the lease. She cornered me in the kitchen, arms crossed. "You took my name off the lease?" "I did." Her voice rose. "You can't just." "I can," I said, cutting her off. "I did." There was no yelling, no grand declaration. I wasn't interested in explaining the why. She could connect the dots if she wanted to. The car was the breaking point. Saturday morning, she grabbed her keys, said she was running to the store, and stepped outside. I heard the engine fail to turn over. A minute later, she came back in, keys in hand, eyes sharp. "What happened to the car?" I looked at her for a long moment. "It's not your car." Her jaw tightened. For a moment, she looked ready to explode. Then something in her shifted. Her shoulders lowered. Her voice softened. "Michael," she said, using that coaxing tone she saved for smoothing over arguments. "I don't know what's going on, but we can talk about it. I'll make dinner tonight. Your favorite. Let's just reset." I almost laughed at the sudden pivot. It wasn't guilt in her voice, it was strategy. Over the next week, the change in her was remarkable. She started making elaborate dinners, meals that took hours to prepare. The house was spotless every evening when I got home. She even rearranged the furniture, like we were staging for some imagined open house. She suggested weekend trips, late-night movies, just us time. To anyone else, it might have looked like a wife trying to save her marriage. But I'd seen enough to know better. These weren't acts of love. They were acts of preservation, hers, not ours. She was trying to patch the holes without admitting she'd torn them in the first place. I played along, accepting the meals, nodding at the small talk, but giving nothing back. No warmth, no reassurance. Just steady, quiet control. Because this wasn't about reconciliation anymore. It was about making sure that when the final break came, she would have nowhere to stand but the ground she'd chosen.